You have felt this before. You are sitting in a room, maybe a work meeting or a family gathering. An idea is presented. It is not a good idea. Deep down, in that quiet place where you are honest with yourself, you know it is flawed. You can see the problems stacked one on top of the other, a tower ready to fall. You open your mouth to speak, but you stop. You look around the table. The others are nodding. They seem to see something you do not. The person speaking is confident. Their voice is smooth and certain. One person says, "That's brilliant." Another agrees, "Yes, this is exactly what we need." A strange heat builds in your chest. You look down at your hands, at the pen on the notepad. You start to question yourself. Am I the one who is wrong? Am I missing something obvious? Everyone else is on board. If I speak up now, I will be the one who slows things down. I will be the one who creates conflict. It is so much easier to just stay quiet. So much safer to just nod along. So you do. You nod. You might even force a small smile. And in that moment, you feel a tiny piece of yourself go silent. You have joined the group. The decision is now unanimous, and the mistake has been set in motion. This feeling, this pressure to fold yourself into the shape of the group, is not an accident. It is one of the oldest and most powerful forces acting on us. We have all felt it. We have all, at some point, given into it. It is the quiet surrender of our own reason for the comfort of belonging, and it reveals a strange and troubling truth about human nature. That while a single person can be smart, a group of smart people can become a machine for manufacturing error. It's a quiet process, this giving up of the self. It happens in boardrooms and on street corners, in families and in governments. It is the story of how we stop thinking for ourselves and let the group think for us. This leads us to a paradox. We generally trust our own minds. When you are alone with a problem, you can turn it over, look at it from different sides, and use your reason to find a solution. We believe that if we take 10 smart people and put them in a room, we will get a solution that is 10 times smarter. We think of it like simple math. More minds should equal more wisdom, but it rarely works that way. Something else happens when we gather. Our individual intelligence does not simply add up. Instead, it can often be subtracted. A different kind of mind can emerge from the group, a mind that is not the sum of its parts. This group mind operates under its own set of rules. It is less rational, more emotional, and far more simple than the minds that make it up. The core question is this: what happens to us inside a group? Why does our ability to reason clearly seem to fade? Why do we trade our personal judgment for the comfort of a shared conclusion, even when that conclusion is wrong? The answer is not that we become stupid. The answer is that our goals change. When we are alone, our goal might be to find the truth. But when we are in a group, a new goal often takes over, the need to fit in. And that simple, powerful need can lead the smartest people to the dumbest places. We are about to explore how that happens. More than a century ago, a French thinker named Gustave Le Bon watched the crowds of Paris and saw something that disturbed him. He saw that when people gathered in large numbers, they changed. They were no longer individuals. They became something else. He wrote about this in his famous book, The Crowd. Le Bon's main idea was that in a crowd, your conscious self disappears. Think of a single drop of water. It is just a drop of water. But when you gather millions of drops together, you can get a tidal wave. The drop doesn't decide to become a wave. It is swept up and becomes part of a force far greater and more primitive than itself. Le Bon believed the same thing happens to us. He said this transformation happens for 3 reasons. First, anonymity. In a crowd, you are invisible. You feel that no one is watching you, that you cannot be held responsible for your actions. The sense of personal accountability that governs your behavior dissolves. This feeling of being unseen gives a person a sense of immense power, and it can unlock instincts they would normally control. Second, contagion. In a crowd, ideas and emotions spread like a virus. One person shouts in anger, and suddenly hundreds are shouting in anger. One person starts running, and the whole crowd stampedes. There is no logical thought. It is a pure, unthinking imitation. Reason is replaced by a shared emotional fever that passes from person to person instantly. Third, suggestibility. A person in a crowd enters a state much like being hypnotized. Their own will is gone. They become an automaton who will follow the suggestions of a leader or the direction of the mob. The critical part of their brain seems to switch off. They are open to acting on impulses that would shock them if they were alone. We can see this today, not just on streets, but online. An online mob is a perfect example of Le Bon's crowd. People are anonymous, hiding behind usernames. An angry idea spreads as thousands of people share and comment without thinking. They are suggestible, ganging up on a target they may not have even heard of an hour earlier. These are people who, in their daily lives, might be kind and reasonable, but in the digital crowd, they become part of a tidal wave, their individual minds surrendered to a collective rage. But is Le Bon's view the whole story? Are crowds only capable of destruction and irrationality? People also gather for peaceful protests, for celebrations, for moments of shared joy and solidarity. A crowd can build as well as destroy. Perhaps the crowd does not create the savagery. Perhaps it only reveals something that was already there, waiting for the safety of numbers to come out. The power of the group does not require a roaring mob or the cover of anonymity. It can be found in a quiet room, under bright lights, with just a handful of other people. The pressure can be just as strong, even when there is nowhere to hide. This was shown in a series of famous experiments that revealed how easily our own eyes can be overruled by the simple need to fit in. A psychologist named Solomon Asch wanted to test the limits of conformity. He designed a simple test. Imagine you are a volunteer for this experiment. You walk into a room and sit at a table with several other people. You are told you will be part of a vision test. It seems easy. You are shown a card with a single line on it. Then you are shown a second card with 3 lines of different lengths, labeled A, B, and C. Your job is to say which of the 3 lines on the second card is the same length as the line on the first card. The answer is obvious. The lines are so clearly different that a child could get it right. The experimenter asks the person at the end of the table to give their answer. They confidently say, the wrong one. You might smile a little. You think, how could they get that wrong? Then the next person gives the same wrong answer. And the next, and the next. Now it is your turn. Suddenly, the room feels hot. Your heart beats a little faster. You look at the lines again. You know the correct answer. You can see it plainly. But everyone else in the room, a room full of strangers, is in complete agreement about something that is clearly false. A conflict explodes in your mind. Do you trust your own senses, or do you trust the group? To say what you see is to stand alone. It is to declare that everyone else is wrong. To agree with them is to betray your own perception. What Asch found was startling. A large number of people chose the second option. They knowingly gave the wrong answer, just to avoid the discomfort of disagreeing with the group. When he asked them why, some said they started to doubt their own eyes. They thought maybe they were the ones who were mistaken. Others admitted they knew it was the wrong answer, but they were afraid of being seen as peculiar or being ridiculed. The fear of social disapproval was more powerful than the evidence of their own senses. But not everyone gave in. There were always some who stuck to what they saw, no matter how much pressure they were under. They reported feeling immense stress and anxiety, but they refused to betray their own judgment. Their quiet courage shows us that the pull of the group is strong, but it is not absolute. Resistance is possible, even if it means standing alone in a room of people telling you that you are wrong. We have seen how a crowd can turn emotional and how a small group can pressure someone into doubt. But there is a third, more troubling kind of group failure. It happens not in mobs or with simple line tests, but in the highest offices and boardrooms. It is what happens when a group of highly intelligent, well-informed experts come together and unanimously agree on a truly terrible decision. This phenomenon is called groupthink. The term was developed by a psychologist named Irving Janis. He studied major policy fiascos, wondering how seasoned leaders could make such obvious mistakes. His most famous case study was the Bay of Pigs invasion. In 1961, a new American president and his team of advisors, often called the best and the brightest, approved a plan for a small force of exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow its government. The plan was a complete disaster from start to finish. The invasion failed almost immediately. Janis wanted to know why. The men who approved this plan were not fools. They were brilliant thinkers, respected experts in their fields. Janis discovered that the problem was not a lack of intelligence, but a flaw in how the group worked together. The group had developed a powerful desire for harmony. The need for everyone to agree became more important than the need to find the right answer. This created a bubble of false confidence. He identified several symptoms of this groupthink sickness. First, there was an illusion of invulnerability. The team felt they were so smart and so skilled that they could not fail. This belief in their own superiority led them to take extreme risks. Second, the group created collective justifications. When doubts did arise, the group would explain them away together, creating elaborate reasons why a bad plan was actually a good one. They were rationalizing, not reasoning. Third, there was immense pressure on anyone who dissented. One key advisor had serious doubts about the plan, but when he voiced them, he was told by others to be a team player. He was made to feel that his disagreement was a sign of disloyalty, not critical thinking. So, he softened his criticism and eventually fell silent. Finally, this led to an illusion of unanimity. Because no one was speaking out, everyone assumed that everyone else agreed. Silence was mistaken for consent. The president was never shown the true extent of the doubts his advisors had, because the advisors were censoring themselves and each other to protect the group's feeling of unity. The Bay of Pigs story is a chilling lesson. The problem was not the individuals, but the system they created. The group's culture made it impossible for good people to use their good judgment. The desire for a friendly, agreeable meeting led them directly into a catastrophe. It shows that the most dangerous group is not a mob in the street, but a committee of experts who have fallen in love with their own agreement. Why does this happen? Why is the pull to conform so powerful that it can make us doubt our own eyes, silence our best judgment, and lead brilliant people to disaster? The reason is not found in modern society. It is found deep in our past. Our brains are running on very old software that was written for a world that no longer exists. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small, tightly knit tribes. Survival depended entirely on the group. The tribe was your source of food, your protection from predators, and your only defense against other hostile tribes. To be a part of the group was to live. To be cast out was a death sentence. Imagine being alone on the ancient savannah. You would not last long. This fundamental reality shaped our psychology. Our brains evolved to be extremely sensitive to our social standing. We developed a powerful, primal need to belong. We learned to monitor the emotions and opinions of others constantly to make sure we were in sync with the group. Disagreeing with the group was a huge risk. If you challenged the leader or questioned the tribe's beliefs, you risked being seen as a troublemaker. The ultimate punishment was ostracism, being thrown out of the group. This fear of social rejection is not a small thing. It is a deep, instinctual fear connected to our very survival. When you are in a meeting and you feel that fear of speaking up, you are not being a coward. You are feeling the echo of that ancient survival instinct. Your brain is not telling you that you might lose an argument. It is screaming a much older warning. Do not get cast out. Do not stand alone. The tribe will leave you behind. So, conformity is not a character flaw. It is a feature of our mental software, a program that was once essential for staying alive. The problem is that this ancient program is now running in a very different world. The modern world is complex. The truth is often not obvious, and the majority is often wrong. The instinct that once kept us safe by making us stick together can now lead us into danger by making us afraid to think for ourselves. We are trying to navigate the information age with a brain that was built for the Stone Age. And that mismatch is the source of many of our modern troubles. That ancient software, with its deep fear of being cast out, is now connected to the internet. The result is groupthink on a scale our ancestors could never have imagined. The same forces that operated around a prehistoric campfire now operate in our pockets, through the screens we look at every day. Think about your social media feed. It is not a window onto the world. It is a carefully curated reality, built by algorithms designed to show you things you will agree with. This creates a powerful echo chamber. The algorithm learns what your tribe thinks, and it feeds you a constant stream of content that confirms those beliefs. It is like the Asch experiment at a global scale. You are constantly being shown what appears to be a massive consensus, making it even harder to consider a different point of view. The likes and shares are modern signals of group approval. When someone steps outside the consensus of their online tribe, the punishment is swift. Online mobs and cancel culture are modern forms of banishment. A person can be digitally cast out, their reputation destroyed by a storm of collective anger. The mechanism is the same as Le Bon's crowd. Anonymity gives people courage to be cruel, and a contagion of outrage spreads from person to person. The fear of being the next target keeps many people silent. This dynamic is not just online. It has seeped into our workplaces. Many companies talk about the importance of company culture. Sometimes this is a good thing, but it can also become a code for a kind of corporate groupthink. The pressure to be a good culture fit can mean you are expected to not challenge the ideas of your superiors. Creative and brilliant people learn to self-censor. They keep their best, most disruptive ideas to themselves to avoid being seen as negative or not a team player. This is the same pressure the advisors felt in the Bay of Pigs meetings. We live in a world that gives us more access to information than ever before. Yet, we are often more trapped in our own bubbles. The technology that promised to connect us all has also given us powerful new tools to sort ourselves into tribes. Our ancient instincts are interacting with modern technology in ways that can suppress dissent and punish independent thought. The pressure to conform has not gone away. It has just changed its form. So, what can we do? How do we fight an instinct that is so deeply wired into our brains? It is not easy, but it is possible. We cannot rewrite our ancient software, but we can become more aware of how it works and create systems to counteract it. Fighting groupthink is not about becoming a rebel who disagrees with everything. It is about creating the space for true thinking to occur. The first step is simply the power of the pause. When a group is rushing toward a decision, the most powerful thing you can do is slow down. Resist the urge to agree immediately. Give yourself a moment to think. Even a few seconds of silence can break the spell of contagion and allow reason to re-enter the room. For groups and teams, one of the most effective tools is to officially designate a dissenter. This is sometimes called a devil's advocate. This person's job is to criticize the plan and find every possible flaw. By making disagreement a formal role, you remove the social fear. The person is not being disloyal. They are doing their job. This simple technique can break the illusion of unanimity and force a group to honestly consider alternatives. Another strategy is to use anonymous feedback. When people can share their opinions without their name attached, the fear of social punishment disappears. This is why anonymous employee surveys or suggestion boxes can be so valuable. They allow the true thoughts of the group to surface without the filter of conformity. On an individual level, the key is to learn how to ask questions instead of making statements. You do not have to shout, "You are all wrong," which will only make the group defensive. Instead, you can ask quietly, "What are the potential downsides we haven't considered?" Or, "Can we imagine a future where this plan fails?" and talk about why it might have happened. A calm question can puncture a bubble of false confidence more effectively than an angry argument. These actions require real courage. It is not easy to be the one who slows things down, who asks the uncomfortable question, or who voices a dissenting opinion. It feels risky because, as we've learned, it is. But this is the work of true thinking. It is about having the courage to use your own mind, even when the whole tribe is pulling you in the other direction. The forces that pull us toward groupthink are always present. They are a permanent part of who we are. In every meeting, in every conversation, in every online forum, the ancient pressure to conform is there, working silently in the background. It is not a problem of them. It is not about foolish people or bad people. It is about all of us. We are all vulnerable. Awareness is the beginning of our defense. By understanding these psychological currents, we can learn to spot them in ourselves and in others. We can see the illusion of unanimity for what it is. We can recognize the fear of standing alone and call it by its name. We can choose to create a pause, to ask a question, to value a dissenting voice. Thinking for yourself is not a single action, but a constant practice. It is a quiet and sometimes lonely choice to value truth over harmony and reason over belonging. It will not always make you popular, but it is the only way to guard against the collective foolishness that even the smartest people are capable of. The loudest crowd noise cannot drown out a single, quiet question if someone is brave enough to ask it.